Every schoolchild learns the same story. A pharaoh named Khufu won a monument worthy of a god king. So he ordered tens of thousands of laborers to drag, carve, and stack more than 2 million blocks of limestone and granite into the most recognizable shape on the planet. 20 years, one king, one plan, one triumphant finish. It is tidy. It is confident. It fits neatly onto a museum plaque. But for more than 3 decades, one man has stood at the base of the Great Pyramid and refused to accept that the story is finished. He is not an archaeologist. He holds no university chair, no field permit, no seat on any official excavation team. And yet his name has become impossible to ignore in any serious conversation about ancient Egypt. His name is Graham Hancock, and what he argues about the true origins of the Great Pyramid does not fit on a plaque at all. At the center of his case is a detail so simple it almost sounds like a technicality, until you understand what it actually means. Inside the largest, most famous tomb ever built, attributed to a ruler obsessed with being remembered forever, there is not one single inscription bearing that ruler's name inside the chamber meant to hold his body. Not one. And once you sit with that fact, the whole confident version of the story starts to wobble. To understand why Hancock's argument has lasted this long, you have to understand where he came from, because his path into Egyptology did not start in a lecture hall. He spent years as a journalist, writing for serious current affairs and financial publications, the kind of environment that trains a person to trust a clean narrative on sight, to ask who benefits from a story being told a particular way, and keep pulling at a thread until it either holds together or comes apart in your hand. That instinct followed him into the desert. In the early 1990s, Hancock stepped away from conventional reporting and turned his attention toward ancient monuments, and once he started, he never really stopped. Over the following decades, he traveled to the Giza Plateau again and again, but also to submerged rock formations off the coast of Japan, terraced hillsides in Indonesia that some believe predate known local civilization, and step pyramids rising out of Central American jungle. He read geology alongside mythology, astronomy alongside oral tradition, treating flood legends and star charts as pieces of the same puzzle rather than separate subjects. Mainstream Egyptologists have not been kind to this approach. Many dismiss his conclusions outright, some calling his work irresponsible pseudo-archaeology that strips credit from the very real, very sophisticated ancient civilizations who actually built these things. His defenders see it differently. They view him as an outsider willing to ask uncomfortable questions that credentialed experts feel too much institutional pressure to raise themselves. Both camps agree on one point. Hancock has spent 30 years staring at the same stones professional archaeology has stared at for 2 centuries, and he keeps arriving at conclusions the establishment does not want to hear. Start where Hancock starts, inside the pyramid itself. Climb through the narrow, low passages, up the steep incline of the Grand Gallery, a space whose engineering still isn't fully explained, and arrive at the king's chamber. Now look around. Ancient Egyptians were not a restrained people when it came to decoration. They covered nearly every surface they built with meaning, hieroglyphic prayers on tomb walls, painted scenes of gods and the afterlife on temple ceilings, spells and titles carved into coffins and columns. Writing a name, to them, was an act of preservation. It kept the soul alive in the world of the living. Their entire theology of death depended on inscription. And yet the king's chamber, supposedly the final resting place of one of the most powerful rulers in human history, is bare. No hieroglyphs, no painted scenes of the king's journey into the afterlife, no funerary texts, no spells, no royal titles, just smooth, undecorated stone. In the center of the room, a plain granite box people call a sarcophagus. It has no lid, no carvings, no inscriptions of its own. When it was first documented in the modern era, it contained no mummy, no jewelry, no preserved organs, no burial goods of any kind, nothing that every other confirmed royal Egyptian burial contains as a matter of course. To Hancock, that silence is not incidental. It is the loudest piece of evidence in the entire building. A civilization that could not leave a blank wall alone left the supposed tomb of its greatest king completely unmarked. That is not the absence of decoration. He argues it is the absence of body and possibly the absence of the man the story claims built it. So if the chamber says nothing and the box says nothing, where does the name Khufu actually come from? How did this pyramid ever get attached to this particular pharaoh in the first place? The answer takes us out of the desert calm and into a much messier scene. 1837, a British adventurer named Colonel Howard Vyse, standing at the base of the Great Pyramid with his funding running out and his reputation on the line. Vyse had come to Egypt hoping to make a discovery significant enough to secure his place in history. Months in, he had nothing to show for it, and his financial backers back home were losing patience fast. Weiss was not an archaeologist working with careful documentation and a soft brush. He had explosives, and he used them. Above the king's chamber sat a series of cramped, low-relieving chambers, stacked directly on top of one another, too shallow for a person to stand upright inside. Weiss believed there were more of these hidden spaces above the ones already known, sealed off since construction. So he blasted his way upward through solid stone to find out. Inside those newly opened chambers, on walls untouched for thousands of years, workers found faint red markings, the kind of quick, functional notation ancient laborers left behind to track crews and quarry origins. And among those markings was a royal cartouche, a name ring, which was read as belonging to Khufu. That discovery became, and remains, the single foundational piece of evidence connecting the specific pharaoh to the specific structure. Every plaque, every textbook, every confident tour guide script that names Khufu as the builder of the Great Pyramid ultimately traces back to those few strokes of red ochre paint, found in a sealed chamber by a desperate man, at the exact moment he most needed to find something extraordinary. Hancock does a thing any careful investigator would do with evidence like this. He asks about the chain of custody. Who found the marks? A man whose career depended on finding them. When were they found? At the precise moment his expedition was on the verge of failure. Were there independent, impartial witnesses present in the chamber at the moment of discovery, documenting everything as it happened? The historical record on that point is thin and disputed. There was no outside team standing by with modern documentation standards. There was Weiss, his crew, and a freshly blasted chamber. Hancock goes further, pointing to arguments some researchers have raised about the marks themselves, claims that certain hieroglyphic forms look inconsistent with the period they're supposed to date from, and observations about how the paint sits on the stone in ways that have struck some observers as unusual. Mainstream Egyptologists regard these as minor, explainable quirks of ancient handwriting and preservation. Nothing more. Hancock is careful not to claim he has proven forgery. He stops short of that. What he insists on is something more unsettling: that the most important piece of evidence in the history of Egyptology has never been treated with the scrutiny it would receive in almost any other serious investigation, because it told everyone exactly what they already wanted to believe. Here Hancock makes his sharpest turn. Suppose, for the sake of argument, the marks are completely genuine, that Khufu's workers really did paint his name in those hidden chambers. Does that prove Khufu built the pyramid? Hancock says no. At most, it proves presence. It proves his workers were there, doing something at some point. But there's an enormous difference between constructing a monument from bare ground and restoring, sealing, or renovating one that already existed, while leaving your mark behind as later rulers so often did. Ancient Egyptians were prolific recyclers of earlier monuments. Later pharaohs are well documented carving their own names over the cartouches of predecessors, claiming older temples, statues, and obelisks as extensions of their own legacy. In their worldview, this was not deceit. It was continuity, a way of absorbing the authority of the past into the present. So Hancock asks, why assume Khufu was the one exception to a habit his entire civilization practiced? What if the pyramid was already standing when his engineers arrived, and what they left behind in those upper chambers was evidence of repair and rededication, not original construction? In that scenario, the name is real and the monument is still far older than the official chronology allows. Both at once, and the unsettling silence inside the king's chamber suddenly makes a strange kind of sense. Khufu inscribed his name only in the hidden, functional spaces where his own workers would see it, because the grand ceremonial chamber was never his story to tell. Step back from the name entirely, and look at where the Great Pyramid sits among its supposed contemporaries. Other pyramids from the same general era, ones far more confidently linked to specific pharaohs through actual inscriptions, funerary texts, and internal decoration, tend to show visible signs of trial and error. Some have collapsed inward. Others show core construction, so crude it barely resembles a pyramid anymore, having lost most or all their outer casing over time. They look like a civilization learning as it goes, occasionally failing badly along the way. The Great Pyramid does not fit that pattern. There is no visible learning curve leading up to it, no earlier rough attempt at the scale of precision. It appears in the timeline as a fully realized achievement, sitting right in the middle of a construction sequence that otherwise looks like a long series of experiments. To Hancock, that is suspicious on its face. Civilizations generally advance gradually, each generation correcting the mistakes of the last. When a masterpiece sits in the middle of a field of rough drafts, the simplest explanation isn't that the same builders somehow nailed the hardest version first. It's that the masterpiece may not belong to that sequence at all. A disagreement over an inscription is one thing. Reasonable people can debate it forever. So Hancock sets the question of names aside completely and points at something that cannot be painted onto a wall by lamplight. The physical structure itself, sitting in the open desert, measurable by anyone with the right instruments. Start with orientation. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north, not magnetic north, which drifts over centuries, but the fixed geographic axis of the planet, with an error margin so small it is difficult to express in ordinary terms. Modern surveyors, using satellite positioning and laser instruments, still find that level of precision genuinely difficult to beat. The official account asks us to accept that a Bronze Age workforce using copper tools, ropes, and the naked eye, with no magnetic compass and no telescope, achieved this accuracy across a footprint spanning many acres. Then there is the foundation itself. The base of the pyramid is leveled to a remarkably fine tolerance across its entire span, a variation smaller than the width of a thumb, across a surface covering more ground than several football fields combined. That leveling was done on raw bedrock by hand, before a single block of the pyramid itself was ever set in place. Then the joints. Walk the interior passages, and, in place after place, you cannot slide even the thinnest edge between the massive stone blocks, some of which weigh many tons apiece. In some sections, these joints are not flat, but curved and interlocking, resembling the kind of engineered joint modern builders use to let a structure flex under stress rather than crack. That is not the mark of rough labor. That is the mark of deliberate design intended to last. Finally, weigh the arithmetic against the clock. The pyramid contains something on the order of 2 million individual blocks. The conventional timeline allows roughly 2 decades for construction. Divide it out, account for rest, weather, and the simple physical limits of muscle and rope, and you arrive at a construction pace that leaves almost no margin for error, sustained without meaningful interruption for years on end. Add the granite ceiling beams of the king's chamber, some weighing as much as a loaded truck, quarried hundreds of miles away, floated down the Nile, and hoisted more than 100 feet into the structure with the same fraction of an inch precision as everything else. And the leading theories about ramps built to move that weight run into a serious problem. A ramp capable of carrying that load at a climbable angle would need to be immense, containing nearly as much material as the pyramid itself. No trace of such a ramp, or any structure resembling one, has ever been found on the plateau. This is the point Hancock keeps returning to, and the one his critics most often overlook. He is not arguing for aliens, and he is not arguing for lost magic. His claim is narrower and, in some ways, more difficult to dismiss. The tools we are told we use do not convincingly explain the result we can measure. The timeline does not comfortably match the arithmetic, and the leading construction theories each solve part of the puzzle, while leaving the rest unresolved. None of them has left behind the kind of physical evidence, like a discarded ramp, that we would expect to find. For separate lines of physical evidence, the astronomical alignment, the leveling of the base, the precision of the joints, and the sheer difficulty of moving the granite, all point toward the same uncomfortable gap between explanation and evidence. Hancock's conclusion is not that the pyramid is impossible. It is that whoever built it, and whenever they built it, they were working with a level of skill, planning, or knowledge that the conventional 20-year, single-pharaoh timeline does not fully account for. It's worth being honest about where things stand outside of Hancock's own framing. The mainstream archaeological and Egyptological community has responded to these arguments in detail over the years, and most professionals in the field remain confident in the conventional chronology, pointing to additional evidence. Quarry records, worker settlements, tool marks, and comparative studies across other Old Kingdom monuments that they say supports Khufu's authorship and a workforce fully capable of the engineering involved. Hancock's critics argue that precision claims are sometimes overstated, that ramp theories have more support in the archaeological record than skeptics acknowledge, and that treating uncertainty about method as evidence of a hidden older civilization goes well beyond what the data can support. None of that erases the questions Hancock raises about the 1837 discovery, or the striking silence inside the king's chamber, or the genuine difficulty of explaining certain construction tolerances with the tools available at the time. It simply means the debate is not settled the way either side sometimes claims. So look again at the 4 numbers at the center of this case. The alignment to true north, the leveling of a 13-acre base, the razor-thin joints between multi-ton blocks, and a construction pace that leaves almost no room for a mistake, sustained for 2 decades straight. Which one of those is hardest to explain away with copper chisels and a fixed deadline? And more importantly, does a confident version of the story you were taught in school actually hold up once you look closely at the evidence it was built on, or have we simply been handed the version that was easiest to believe?